Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Now, I have here a very special guest. I had the pleasure of meeting her a few months back at an event we had in New York. Please welcome to the show, Rita Gigante. Rita, how are you?
I'm good, hon. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, listen, it's an honor to have you on the show. And, you've got a very different style story yourself, but on top of that, your father, which you also have a book that we'll get into, The Godfather's Daughter. Is that right?
Yes, the Godfather's daughter.
Your father was Vincent the Chin Gigante. I mean, one of the most probably well-known and powerful mob bosses ever. I mean, when I think La Cosa Nostra and powerful mob bosses, his name and Carlo Gambino are kind of, neck and neck. Obviously,
Right.
there's people that were, in the news that like John Gotti, but they never were the status of guys like your father and Carlo Gambino. And, we're going to get into a little bit that here today, but I mean, I guess just tell me growing up, obviously when you're young, you don't have a sense of who your father is. Like my dad hung sheetrock for a living, obviously a little different from yours. But when I was growing up, he was just dad. How
Right.
was it growing up with Vinny DeChin as a father?
So for me, there was always a mystery to it. There was always an underlying anxiety around it because, um, there, growing up in an Italian Catholic family, things were very, very hushed. Like you didn't talk. You did, you kept things very, very quiet. The family was very close knit. So, but there was always this understanding of you don't ask questions, and there was always this understanding of this guy is important. I don't know how he's important, but I see a lot of people listen to what he says, just being 7 8 years old, noticing, and then around 10 years old, him sitting around the table at my grandmother's apartment with like 5 6 guys, and there's music in the background. There's Italian music usually in the background, and there's cartoons on the TV, and I'm just watching them passing notes back and forth to each other. Sometimes they would walk over, whisper in his ear. I'm watching. I got like one ear on the and one eye on the TV, and the other one in that direction. I'm like, all right, what's going on here? And there was, you know, because I didn't know what was going on, and because I didn't understand the enormity of it, but I could feel it, so to speak.
Right.
There was a lot of anxiety around it, and nobody ever said what it was and what it meant, and what could be. I was guessing most of my life of what it was.
Right.
So
And I mean, coming up too, your father, I guess Vito Genovese really took a liking to your father at a young age.
yes, my father was very young, and Vito took him under his wing and put him in the boxing ring at the age of 16. But he was running numbers even at 14. And he was a very charismatic energy, my dad. So
Mhm.
people just liked him in general. He was very fair. He was, anybody you talked to, he was, if you needed something, he was there. If you felt, especially he had an affinity for the elderly.
Mhm.
So, he took care of everybody in that vicinity, in Sullivan Street, Thompson Street, Bleecker Street, the whole west side, was his domain. So,
Right.
um, yeah, and he was well respected.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one of the things that, if people read up on your father, they may or may not read about I guess you would say, failed hit on Frank Costello coming out of the hotel. The bullet actually went through his fedora, I think, if I'm
Yep.
not mistaken. So very, very close. But to do that at that time, Frank was a boss, or a major player. Usually if you fail at something like that, that's not a good outcome. But your father, he almost used that and propelled him. Now he did go on the run after that, which Frank didn't rat him out. From what I understand, they wanted Frank to do it, and Frank may or may not have knew who did it, but I know he didn't say anything. But he also knew that attempt was probably his retirement calling, and I think right
Yes.
after that he did step down. Now, the rumor that I've always heard, and I think you did clear this up in New York, but I'll say it again or go over it again for our listeners. the rumor was when he shot him and he missed, he went on the lam, and that he put on some weight to try to change his appearance. And when he come back, that's where the chin comes from. But that's not exactly accurate. Is that right?
No.
Okay.
It's, my grandmother nicknamed him because it was Vincenzo.
Right.
And she shortened it to Chinzy. And then in the street, it became Chin. And
Okay.
so, it was a nickname, but it was almost a sweet like nickname that my grandmother gave him, but it ended up being his iconic,
Right.
part of him and his, and his his role, I
Yeah.
should say, because I'll tell you, he could have won a nominee, that's for sure. He
Yeah.
played it well.
We're gonna get into that too, but he did put on a little weight though when he went on the lam for that, because when he come back, he was a little bit heftier size wise.
Yes. He at some point, I believe my mother had said to me, he was up to like 300 pounds.
Yeah, wow. And that was not what he was boxing at, I know.
No, no, he looked fabulous when he was boxing. I have his picture hanging in my house, and I can't believe the difference, because I do have pictures of him very heavy as well.
Right.
And but once his he had a heart condition, so once that got worse, he became very strict with what he ate, and he exercised, and he did all of that.
What kind of heart condition did he have, if you don't mind me asking?
He had I think it was rheumatic fever when he was a baby.
Okay.
And he ended up with a heart condition because of it. And then the valves in his heart were not good, so he had to have a valve replacement.
Okay. I only asked because I have what's called a VSD, which is like the long, that's the short name for it. The long one is like ventricular septal defect or something along those lines. It was basically a hole in the heart that they knew when I was born, and it never affected me growing up, but it was something they monitored. And then when I was a senior in high school, I was going for a checkup like every 4 years, and the doctor's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "What do you mean, oh?" And basically what it was what they thought was a very small, minute hole was actually not huge, but bigger than what they thought, that it could give me problems later on in life.
Later on. Okay.
So they decided to go ahead and do it while I was young and could bounce back, as opposed to, when I'm 60 and can't, or maybe, something worse. So that's why I asked, and I actually have the zipper scar. I don't know if you can tell it, but the zipper scar there, because they had to, that was old school. They had to bust me open. It was quite painful.
Yeah, no, they had to do the same with him. It was so funny when he came out of surgery, he thought he got flown in with a helicopter. He said, I remember coming in by helicopter. They took me on the roof and they brought me down. Yeah, that's what happens when they put you out.
So when he comes back from that he never went to trial for that attempt there, did he? I don't think. I know he got arrested, but
no, never panned out that way. He went to jail once with Vito,
right?
And for about 5 years, and swore he would never go back.
And he done a hell of a job to elude authorities. Before that started, I guess, did you ever see any violence around that? I know you told a story up there in New York about a dog in the neighborhood, and I don't know if you said somebody hit the dog or something like that.
The dog was trained. The dog wasn't even my father's at the time. It was my uncle's dog. He brought him to where my father, did business, the cafe we called it, and the dog immediately took to my father and would not leave his side. And then the dog was trained basically to not like black people. And so, he just instinctively, and one day my grandmother was walking down the street, she was going shopping, and a black man tried to rob her. And the dog saw it and chased the man down. So he went into, at the time it was called the Mills Hotel on Bleecker Street. And there was also another man, black man, standing outside. He would open the door for people, So everybody, when they saw Bullets, the name of the dog was Bullets. When they saw Bullets go, they followed him to the Mills Hotel, and the guy at the door said, "He's in here," because he got scared because he saw all of them coming. He goes, "Oh no, he's in here," And then he when he came out, Bullets had him on the ground with his mouth, with his mouth around his neck here, waiting for my father to give the command, which of course he didn't.
Yeah.
He pulled the dog back, and then he told the dog go, like that, and the dog would run to this woman's house. She lived, on Sullivan Street. He would run right up to her house and out the window and waited for my father to whistle for him to come back,
Wow.
because we knew the authorities were coming at some point. And then who knows what happened to that man after that? I have no idea.
So you never witnessed, like, did you ever witness your father have to, be violent, or did he try to strictly keep that away from the family side of things?
I witnessed one thing, but I witnessed it underneath I was 5 years old. I was playing underneath my grandmother's dining room table, and there was music playing in the background, and I was under there, and I remember commotion. I remember seeing shoes. I remember hearing somebody being beaten. You can hear the punches.
Yeah.
The man hit the floor, and I can see another hand still hitting him, and I could see my father's pinky ring. So I knew it was my dad hitting him, and all of a sudden, all this blood was trickling, like right to where I was, like right to and I'll tell you the truth, I didn't remember this till I started writing my book, and I had a flashback. And I was working with someone when I had the flashback. And so, meaning in my business, because I did massage back then.
Right.
I had the vision, and I thought it was for her, and it was mine.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment, and that was after that time, I remember my first anxiety attack was at that age, at 5. And what happens is kids see those kind of things, they experience that, and then they bury it because of fear, And then at the age of 7, I ended up with panic attacks. And then on and on and on it went, because of, just experiencing that one traumatic event. So
Right.
I was petrified of him.
Wow. Now, I mean, and I've talked with a lot of guys, in the life, like Anthony Ruggiano, who you've, spoken with.
Yes.
A lot of people, or I ain't gonna say a lot, some fathers, and obviously it's a different situation because it's a son, but they kind of push that life on them or invite them into it. Your father was heavily against any of you, your brothers, or anybody getting involved with that. I think I've heard you say that
He
it
would
ended
never.
with him.
Absolutely. He forbid it. He said it begins and ends with me. I don't want my kids in this.
Wow.
So yeah. When John Gotti made his son, and he told my father said, wow, I'm sorry. Like, it's a shame, because he's like, that's just not something he would have done. My
Yeah, I've
father.
heard that story. I think he said something about my condolences or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I've heard that story. Wow. So now, how was John Gotti and your father's relationship? Because, I mean, movies kind of portray it one way, certain things portray it one way. How was that relationship?
My dad wasn't very fond of him because of the way he, portrayed himself. He put
Right.
himself out there, very flashy, very, he opened up his mouth. He almost taunted, them to the FBI to want to come closer.
Yeah.
Like, you
Oh,
can't get me,
absolutely.
you can't touch me. I'm untouchable, and that kind of attention, my father didn't care for.
Well, nobody had been that way until he
Nobody.
like everybody operated in secret. Even people that knew who they were, what they did, that's one thing, but to flash it in front of every newspaper and like that, it was just
Right,
wasn't done before. You had never seen Carla Gambino on the cover of Time magazine, or your father for that
right.
matter. It was just it. I know people love Gotti for his brashness, but at the same time, in what the mob was and what it was about, and its principles, it was against every facet of every damn thing they stood for.
Well, that's what the ego will do to you.
Right.
Um, and then I looked at my dad, and I'm like, well, he went the total opposite direction, but he still brought attention to himself. even with the robe and you know what I mean, and slippers.
Hmm.
So he just downplayed it and you know made it in a totally different way. Made it still, you know, they dubbed him the Odd Father. They
Yeah.
would say, you know, so he still got attention even doing it that way. But he listen. The biggest thing that my father was able to do is, and he didn't do it for 40 years. He wouldn't speak on a phone, and he would never ever speak out loud.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you were saying earlier when the guys were there, like even in your house, they would still pass notes to each other.
Passing notes to each other. The phone was off the hook all the time. All the time. Phone was never on. The only time I ever heard his voice on the phone was when he went to jail.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's old school though. That's old school tricks. And
You had to have a certain mindset to do what he did and run an organization like that and run two families because he, you know, he had our family and then he had another family. So you're talking about three families, you know, and the organization itself was tremendous.
Mhm.
So I don't know how he kept track. I mean, you have to have a mind of steel. You
Yeah.
have to you have to remember your own lies and believe them, you
Well,
know.
I mean, it's often been said, and I believe this to be 100% true, that anybody that could run a crime family like that could have very well been a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, because there's so many
100%.
things at play that you have to keep going. Okay, this guy's over this guy's over that, this guy's bringing in this. And then because you're in, you know, a lot of the businesses are illegal and, you know, stuff that you have to constantly keep evolving and figuring out new ways to do whatever to keep money coming in. You can't just be satisfied
Sure.
with one score. You have to keep going. And so to do that is an ever changing mind in the business world, like today. So it's crazy the amount of knowledge and smarts that a lot of those guys had and possessed to be able to do that. Be it, you know, it might have been illegal, but it's still impressive, you know, how they were able to handle an organization like that.
Yeah. Yeah. They did listen, they had certain codes, morals when it came to that organization. I'm not condoning any of it. But I don't condone what our own government tends to do. So,
Yeah.
you know, if you would, my father was alive today, he would tell you straight out, they are the true organized crime.
Oh, I believe that 100%. I don't know if you've seen
Oh,
or caught or paid attention today, but the Brittany Grenner situation, which she
I,
was.
not,
Okay, so did you hear about the girl? She played basketball for women's basketball. She was on our Olympic team, and she was in Russia for a game, but she had a vape pen that was, I guess, CBD or it might have been actual THC. I'm not sure, but it was only a vape pen, but they give her like a 5-year sentence.
oh my God.
So, I mean, the penalty was way more severe than it should have been, but she made the news because she was an athlete. Well, Biden just traded her, and I don't want to butcher this guy's name, but he's basically one of the biggest arm dealers ever. That his nickname was the Merchant of Death.
Oh my God.
Yeah, if you've ever seen that movie, The Lord of War, with Nicolas Cage, where he sells guns to other
Okay.
countries, he basically started selling guns. He's Russian, and when the Soviet, you know, everything was done with that in the Cold War, he started selling guns. I mean, he's basically a terrorist. They traded him for Brittany Grenner.
Wow.
Yeah, that just happened today, and I'm just like, that makes
Wow.
America look so weak that you traded that. I mean,
Wow. I just cannot believe what's going on today. It's
no, me neither. And guy, you said it perfect. Guys like your father and other men, I mean, they would just be driving themselves crazy right now with everything that's going on.
oh, my father talks to me all the time. He can't believe it. He's so glad he's not here anymore.
I bet
You
he
know?
is.
Yeah. This is it's just craziness.
So when I don't want to say act, but I mean, I guess in a sense it was, but when he
Yeah.
started this thing with the walking around in the bathroom and the slippers, that was, did you know why he was doing it, or did you understand him? But what age were you, I guess, is the best start question with that when he started doing it.
So at 16, I really found out the whole story.
Right.
And I was, you know, when you hear something like that, you're stunned, but yet you're like all the pieces of the puzzle kind of snapped into place in that moment,
Mhm.
because then I understood the enormity of it. I think I was more afraid of what, yeah, if the FBI could get him, take him away, than I was afraid of anything, because he tended to make you feel safe, my dad. You
Right.
know, there was something about his energy, there was something about his demeanor. And there were gentle sides of him that, nobody would know. He was very soft spoken at times too, although he could, I've heard him get loud and crazy, but there was also a soft side to him, which rarely came out, but when it did, it showed that really authentic father image of him,
Right.
which I enjoyed so much, like I could, probably the only one that could get him up with an Elvis song and have him dance with two left feet, even though he couldn't dance for anything, but he would get up in his boxer shorts and, shimmy it up. And I'd be like, oh, there he is, and then he'd go right back into, then I've witnessed him in front of doctors, do his thing. And I'd be like, holy shit. Like it took everything inside of me not to be hysterical laughing, because he's imitating the cartoons,
Yeah.
and answering things like God told me to do this or that, or I was just, and boy, did he fucking do it good. I was stunned.
So when you found out who your father was, did you already have like a knowledge of the mob and other
I had a
families and who
knowledge
they
of
were?
it. I had a knowledge of it, but I had no idea who he was in that arena. Like I didn't
Right.
know he was the guy,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
just the Genovese, but the commission,
Yeah.
what that meant, and how it affected so many people, around the country.
Yeah.
So um to me that was huge. And yet, you know, as it was almost like, oh yeah, that's my dad. Like I know, like almost like but you don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that, but um, it's the way you're raised. That's I try to explain to people, like it's just you just have a knowing, but you don't fully know. We'll say, because you're never. I've asked questions and I got told, don't worry about it. Just remember, Daddy's sick.
I got
He's
you.
you know.
Well, so an underlining story in all this, because obviously your father is very polarizing, but you yourself are a psychic medium.
Yes.
When did you realize, in the midst of everything that was going on with your father, realizing who he was, and then him, you know, putting on this, I want to say just, it was basically a great cover because it kept him, if he hadn't have done that, I think the feds would have closed in a long time before they did, my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you had this gift and how did you come to realize it?
Um, I realized it in my early 20s. I would say my mid 20s.
Okay, so not when he was doing this, you didn't have any inkling that you had this power.
No, the thing was, I realized because when I went to massage school, I could put my hands on somebody and I can feel what was going on in their body. And I didn't know how I could do that. So I was picking up energy all along, not knowing. After realizing who I was, like I was this empath, meaning I could feel everything, I can sense everybody's energy. Now I understand why I was so anxious and had panic attacks and OCD and all kinds of stuff, depression, because I was picking up stuff at that age from everyone
And you
and
just
not knowing
couldn't
how to
tell what it
handle the
was.
energy. Right. So in my 20s, when I realized, then I ended up um, coming in contact with people that did this for a living, and they were teaching me how to work with my energy.
Okay.
And so then it became more and more, I want to say, developed and
Mhm.
very intense. And then one day I just realized I could, if I put my hands on somebody, I could read what was going on. Or if I didn't put my hands on somebody, I could still do that.
Wow.
I didn't know I could be a medium. which is being able to speak to loved ones on the other side, their animals, everything, until my father passed.
Oh, okay. So you never got a chance to even talk with him about, that availability.
No, the only thing he knew was that I had good hands because I would sometimes massage him.
Right.
And he would say, "Oh, you got good hands." I had his hands, believe it or not. He had nice hands, my dad. And soft, so soft. So yeah, so we never got a chance to talk about it. Now, he was a man of very few words with me anyway. But when he got into spirit, it's like I couldn't shut him up. He would talk constantly to me. He was apologizing for all that he did. He was recognizing how he hurt all of us. He was, he was wanted to be forgiven. He wanted redemption, and he wanted to help me now with my work here. So, he loves the fact now that I wrote a book, even though he knew nothing about it when he was alive. I waited, for my mother's sake, 7 years after he passed.
Okay, so were you writing the book while he was incarcerated, or?
I began writing letters to him, which then ended up being part of the story of the book.
Okay.
Because I got told by spirit, you're going to be writing your story. You're going to be writing your story. Start to write down your memories, and all of them weren't, right at the top of my head because they were coming later as I was writing. Things were coming up for me that I thought I totally forgot about, and it was so cathartic and so healing that I wanted to share it because I thought people could relate to so many of the aspects of what was in the book. The fact that I was gay and had to come out, the fact of my father and who he was and what he thought about that life, being suppressed as a woman, because women was supposed to be in the kitchen making babies and, cooking and cleaning and all that. And, on and on and on. So
now, what was Vinny's reaction to that when you told him?
That I was gay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 19 when I tried to come out to him and my mom. I remember dripping in sweat because I was about to walk into my mother's bedroom in Jersey because he came out for the weekend. And I remember sitting there and I remember saying the words that I liked women. And I remember his reaction was very still, which scared the shit out of me because I would have felt much better if he would have just slapped me, but he remained very still and he said to me, he said, kids go through these things. Like, this is just a phase. It's okay, whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm in deep shit in my head. If I could have, after the words came out, if I could have jumped in the air and took them back and put them in my mouth, I would have. Because I knew that was it after that. Because at the end of the conversation, he said to me, and you know what? Maybe you don't see your friends too much anymore. Like, so he didn't want me to see any of my girlfriends anymore. And, it was, so I knew immediately. I jumped right back in and I played like I was straight till about the age of 24. And then I came to my mother and I said, I'm physically ill because I can't live the lie anymore. It said, so, this is it.
Wasn't if I'm not mistaken, I believe I've heard you say that, I don't know if it was your girlfriend or wife or whatever at the time, but she actually took care of your mother when she was sick later on in life, right?
Oh, yes, my wife.
Okay.
Yeah, we took my mom in at the end and we took care of her. Oh, she loved my wife.
Wow.
And my mom accepted when I told her at 24, she fully accepted it. She was more afraid of my soul than she was anything, and she wanted to make sure I wasn't going to hell. Even I don't believe in any of that, but this is an Italian Catholic, raised woman who was literally afraid of that. But in the end, she was okay. And God, she said a rosary for each one of us every day. 5 rosaries a day. Between her and my father, we had more prayers than you can imagine. You can't even.
You know, it kind of, it's always been curious to me. So, like, obviously you've seen a different, even though your father had a certain demeanor, like we've kind of discussed here, you've seen a different side of your father, like the guy that would get up and dance in his boxers to Elvis, but, he was quick to snap out of it. Do you think at any point in there that he maybe wished he wasn't who he was and he led a regular life? Because there's always something that I think keeps people in that life, whether it is the power, whether it is the money, or whether it is just that they've grown up in it and they feel like it's just because a lot of guys that I've spoke to, look at this as a regular job. It just so happens we're in a normal job. Like if I mess up, I might get fired. In that world, if you mess up, you could get killed. But
Right.
they still look at it as a regular job. Do you think there was any part of him that ever wished that he wasn't who he was?
Yes, only because he's talked to me about it in the spirit world. So yes, there was a piece of him that, but he also said it was the power that drove him.
Okay.
It never had anything to do with the money. To him, money was, fluid. It came and it went. It came and it went, and he always knew he'd have it.
Mhm.
So it wasn't about the money. It was all about the power. And he said it got the best of me. He said it drove my ego, and I lost sight. Although he was a very religious man. He had icons everywhere. He would pray 5 rosaries a day, like my mom. They would pray when my sisters and brothers were kids, because I came way after everybody. So they would all say the rosary together. So he would pray a lot and believed in God and all of that. He just he got caught up, and we didn't come from you know, a luxurious life. My grandmother was a seamstress, and my grandfather was a jeweler. So it's not like that. Although my grandmother in Italy, before she came here, was very wealthy.
Right.
So she left that life to come here, and her life wasn't that anymore.
Wow. So, and that, I mean, again, we've talked about how brilliant, your father was to be able to run that crime family for as long as he did. The cover that he chose, for those that may not be as well versed in this as some of our other listeners, he portrayed somebody that was, I guess, in a sense, losing it or going senile or doesn't have all his wits about him, when in fact it was the exact opposite, sly like a fox, I guess you could say. But there's been, like you said, I think there was a newspaper that come out that said the odd father. He would walk down the streets in his slippers and his bathrobe. Sometimes you would walk with him, right?
Yeah, he was I remember being in my grandmother's apartment on Sullivan Street, and he'd say, "Walk with me." That's all he would say. He'd just say, "Come on, we're going for a walk." He'd have his pajamas on, he'd put his slippers on, his robe, he put his pea cap on. And if he didn't have the pea cap on, he would mess his hair up. He'd hang his head over and he'd tell me, "Hold my arm." This is almost a 6 foot, man.
Yeah.
I'm 5'1", like what would it look like me holding him up? I don't know. But but I did it anyway. And some people would walk by and almost like tip their hat, like noticing him and knowing him, and just saying hello. And other people would be like, what you know what I mean? And that side of me would come out, and I'd be like, "You don't know fucking anything, mind your business." As his daughter. And then the other side would be like, "Oh, I can't even believe I'm doing this," like in my head. These were the things that would go through my head. But he was still my father, and I loved him.
Did
Of
you get
course.
why he was doing this? I mean, did you understand it? What he was doing, and you were cool with, I guess you would. I want to say act. I mean, I think act's the word, but the con might be even be the better word.
Of course. I mean, he checked himself into mental hospitals when he felt the FBI was getting too close to him. He would check himself into St. Vincent's Hospital, you know, um, and he'd be on the third floor with all the other schizophrenics and, bipolar people. And I have to tell you, that was the one thing that really, out of all the things, and I'm not saying, I don't condone the murder or the this or the that, but watching people suffer, because I'd have to walk through the hallways to get to his room
Mhm.
and see the suffering of those people. it just felt like he was making a mockery out of that illness. Because I mean, it was sad. You know what I mean? So I had to really come to terms with that. That was hard for me. So
Yeah, I can see that. I can see where that would be hard, knowing that he's doing this to try to obviously elude authorities and not go to prison because he promised you guys he wouldn't go back. But you're having to walk through there with people that are really
yeah,
dealing with that illness. And I can see that where that would kind of eat away at you.
yeah, it was hard. It was because I just felt like, my God, there's so many people suffering. And I help a lot of people today that, have certain depressions, anxieties. Some are even, have bipolar, but they're treated, and I'm trying to help them work through it. And he's actually helping me as well, believe it or not, from the other side. So he's really trying hard to kind of work on his karma from that end, you know.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like to me that in spirit, he's trying to be more of the father that he didn't get a chance to be while he was here on earth because he was such an important cog of La Cosa Nostra. I mean, that's just,
Of course,
what I see.
of course, yeah. Now he's free,
Right. He doesn't
He
have
doesn't
that
have his
responsibility.
right. He doesn't have that. He doesn't have his ego attached to him. It has nothing to do with power anymore. He's free to be who he wants to be. God, he'd never been on vacation but once on his honeymoon. He'd never gone anywhere. He never enjoyed himself in any way, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of the one thing, like when people see, movies or whatever of guys in this life, it's like, do you ever get to sit back and enjoy it? Like there's very few people that A, don't end up in jail, or B, don't end up murdered. There's very few people that kind of ride off into the sunset,
Right.
and are able to live a life, at home. And definitely a lot lesser people nowadays. Back in the day, Luciano did do some time. He got out. Costello narrowly escaping by the hands of your father. He retired and kind of let him admire Lansky. But those are, if you notice the pattern, those are all old school guys that done
Yep.
stuff a different way. And I think part of that too is just society we live in. As criminals get better, cops get better. So
Right.
surveillance gets better, and ways they catch you gets better. It's always a big game of cat and mouse. And there's not a whole lot of people that there's a happy ending for. So it's almost like you do all this, but do you ever get to really enjoy it while you're here?
Right. Right. And not really, no. He didn't really, it's from what I can see. Every time I watched him, he was very much in, deep thought, probably thinking of 900,000 things that he had to make sure he did this, that, or, all his bases were covered. So when he did come out of it for a second, we'll say when he came out of the act for a second or two, he was enjoyable. Like I could tell, like he could be like a dad that could, want to hang out and have a laugh or two or whatever. And, it's almost like he realized, and then he kind of just went right back into his, demeanor.
Well, I think too, given that world, and obviously a lot of people had families, but if you show that side, that vulnerability, it's looked at as weakness sometimes, I think, in that life. So he had to have that demeanor, and it kind of sounds like almost like if he felt himself letting that demeanor go and not holding on to it as strong, he had to kind of snap. All right, I got to back to, back to who I am, back to people what they think I should be. And because it's sad, but I mean, a lot of people will look, oh, he's, look at him, he's dancing to Elvis, we can't have that. And
right.
it's looked at as weakness. So I can't imagine the stress he was under for all those years too.
Oh, I can't
It's crazy.
I can't, I don't know how he didn't have a freaking nervous breakdown because I'm a good multitasker, but that's like insanity multitasking. You know what I
Oh,
mean? That's like so over the top. So I know he had people under him working for him, but still he had to keep everything,
yeah, because who was they claimed that was Salerno, Fat Tony Salerno was running the Genovese, but in all actuality, he was kind of the front guy, I think, to maybe try to take some of the heat,
Right.
off your father. But still, that's got to be a lot because you're worried about your crime family. Then you're worried about your own family. And as you alluded to, he actually had another family. And then you're also worrying about the police. So it's like, God, when do you even get a chance to take a breath? You don't.
Yeah. And, he lived most of his life at night, you know, and he slept most of the day. So I don't know how he did it.
Was there ever an attempt on your father's life?
Not that I'm aware of.
I was about to say, I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of research on a lot of guys, and I don't know that I've ever seen where anyone, I mean, to start with, that's a major move. I mean, it's a major move taking out a boss anyway, but even at a younger age when he wasn't at that status, I've never seen where anybody tried to go that route with your father.
No, nobody's ever told me that, and I'm not aware of it myself, so I don't think so, no.
Okay. Now, the when he actually did plead guilty, more of the reason for that was the feds kind of used your family. And
Yeah.
I guess, was that your part of that too? As we're going to come after them if you don't cop to who you really
Yeah.
are.
Yes, it was because when 9/11 happened, my dad called the house immediately to make sure everybody was okay, and he was talking coherently. And so, they had him on tape talking coherently. And, basically what they said was, they'll come after us for obstruction of justice, for aiding and abetting, for all of that if he doesn't cop to who he really was, and that's when it all ended. Because he was getting out.
Yeah.
They really couldn't have kept him. And they only had him on, on hearsay, on like there was no heavy evidence.
Right.
It was all on people's word, or all of that. So they knew he was going to get out, and his heart was still good. So when he died, I don't know, it's a little bit of a mystery. They said he died of congestive heart failure. That means he wasn't, if that happened, that means his pills had to have been, either screwed around with, because he was diligent with his medicine. So, who knows? I don't even care at this point.
Right.
I'm just saying that something wasn't, he had a strong heart, and he was coming out, but
I don't put anything past our
yeah,
government.
I don't either. So
Yeah.
not accusing, just saying it's a
Right.
possibility.
Yeah. Not accusing, but
Right.
just not. We wouldn't be shocked if we find out somebody may have swapped a certain
No,
bottle of pills for another bottle of pills.
I just know who he was when he was very diligent with his pills and his food and all of that, almost obsessive about it. So I find it hard to believe, to
Now,
be
what
honest.
prison was he at?
When he died, he was in Missouri, but he got moved a few times. And the one thing my dad hated was flying. So anytime they moved him, he that was the one. He wasn't afraid of anything, but flying, he was not happy about flying. At one point, he was in the same prison with Gotti.
Well, that's what I was
And
going to ask. Didn't they Gotti got wound up going to Springfield, Missouri too, right? I'm assuming you're talking about Springfield, Missouri.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they had to remove. I don't know if they removed him or my father, because my father was in a couple of places, but he ended up staying in Missouri at the end, and that's where he passed.
Because that is a medical prison, right?
Yes, they
Yeah.
had to put him there because of his medical condition.
I know originally when John went away, I think he went to Marion. And then I was actually working with a guy that said he was an orderly at the prison where John Gotti was at. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, where was it? Or I asked him where it was. And he said, Springfield, Missouri. And I was like, I'm fairly sure he got locked up in it. But then when I got to look, and once he got the throat cancer, he was transferred to the medical facility in Springfield, Missouri. And that's where a lot of guys go, once they get, you know, medical issues that need to be attended to. And I wasn't aware of that. So, wow, did they bump into each other there when they realized
No, that once they
transfer?
realized, I don't know how they didn't realize this. I mean, once they realized, they were kept on separate ends of the spectrum. But I want to say one of them got removed from there. And I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was my father or him. And then my father went back. or they moved him. But John died a horrible death.
Oh yeah. If anybody's seen any videos of him in his later years, like when he was talking in the rooms or whatever, and that was a bad way to go. And
Oh yeah.
especially someone that was like him and as charismatic as him to go basically almost kind of getting eaten away, if you will. That had to be a slow, grueling, agonizing death for him, for sure.
Sure, sure. I was grateful my father went fast. You
Yeah.
know, it was during the night and his lungs filled up and that was it. So I was very grateful for that because nobody wants to see anybody suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
So when he called y'all after 9/11, were y'all close to where the towers were? Or you just want to make sure everybody was good?
Yeah, no, nobody was in the city, thank God.
Okay.
We were at my mother's house. We were watching it. At one point, I came into the room when I saw it. I was like, "Mom, what movie are you watching?" She goes, "No, the news is on." I'm like, "The news?" And then I realized what was happening. And then the phone rang, and it was him. And I was like, "Oh shit, he's watching it." I'm thinking, "Oh my God, So he was petrified. Something happened to one of us.
Well, side note for anybody that's listening, if in the future, if you unfortunately find yourself incarcerated, they do monitor and record every phone call you make out of there. Just as a side note for people going forward, they do
Listen, I
record.
got news for you. I talk on the phone to people, and then it pops up on my news feed on Facebook, and all of a sudden I'm getting ads for whatever I was speaking about. And I'm thinking to myself, they're listening to every conversation.
Everything. I swear, me and my wife was talking the other day about a concert we wanted to go to, and I open up my phone and start scrolling, and there's an ad for tickets for a concert in my local area, and I'm like, well, I didn't search shit for that. Like, I didn't punch in where they at, when they
Who
coming.
hasn't?
I was just like, holy cow! Like, this is out of hand.
What is happening? I don't know. I'm like, then when you shut the door to go to the bathroom, you're wondering. Because you see this shit in the movies, so it's possible.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I
they
mean?
got it from somewhere.
Exactly.
Um, so after your father passed away, I've heard you say that was it immediately that you made contact with him?
Immediately, he came to a friend of mine. It wasn't me. He came to a friend of mine, and she called me, and I'm sorry, I called her to tell her my father passed, and she said, "I know he's here." I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, he wants to tell you something." And he said to me, "I'm fine. I'm okay. I want you to go to your mother now," because my mother was devastated. So I hung up the phone. He said, "And I'll be back to talk to you," meaning me, not realizing he was literally coming back to speak to just me, not through somebody. So it wasn't even a 5-minute conversation I had with her. I hung up the phone and I immediately left work and, went to my mother and I told her he's okay. He came, he's okay. At that time, my mother knew what I did. She knew the people I worked with, so she understood. So it was some sort of consolation, but she was devastated.
Now, at that point in time, I've always kind of been curious. So you knew you had this gift to talk to people that had passed on, but before then, had you talked to any of your own family that had passed away?
No.
So he was the first one. How was that? Because I got to think, even if you have that gift to speak to someone of your own family that's passed, that's got to be just a little different
He was a bull in a china shop.
in spirit.
He would come in with an energy that no one could dismiss if they wanted to. That's how I began to know it was him. Everybody has a different energy that comes to you. So you know them by their energy, not necessarily their name or anything,
Right.
right? So when he came in, it was very, very like overwhelmingly strong, kind of like the way he was here. And now he comes in so soft. I'm amazed because he just wanted to get my attention at the beginning so
Mm-hmm.
that he can speak to me. And after a while of doing that, then he came in much softer. But if he had something to tell me and I was working and I couldn't pay attention at all, he would go to my colleagues, any one of them, and taunt them until they got to me to tell me what he needed to say. At one point, they said to me, please have him back off because his energy is too heavy for me, you know?
He's still doing that intimidation stuff there.
Oh my God. I said, come on. So now he doesn't have to go to anybody else because he knows he can come straight to me and that's it.
What about your mom? Contact with her as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very hard for me when my mom passed because I was the closest to her. I was the last, I was the youngest, and she she was my heart, So when she passed, it took me about a year and a half before I could work, before I could do anything. Um, and it was clearing all her energy out of me because I literally held her up through this whole thing from the time I was born right up until she passed because she couldn't handle what was going on emotionally. So I took on her stuff. So I was releasing all of her stuff on top of releasing my own. Took me about a year and a half. So she didn't come to me at all. She would come through people to me, but not in my energy because I wouldn't have been able to handle it. And she, when she passed, immediately she came to a friend of mine and said, and was waving and said, "Tell Rita I'm okay. Tell her I'm okay." Um, and afterwards, I got many messages. Like one of the first messages was, it was the hardest thing for her was to leave me. That's why I wasn't in the room because she just wouldn't have gone, even though she was unconscious when she was in the hospital. I know that it wouldn't have been easy for her to pass. She would have waited for me to walk out of the room. So I stayed in the other room and I was kind of connected to her energy and I kept saying to her, it's okay, you know, even though I knew it wasn't okay.
Yeah. And I think sometimes those are factors that get lost when obviously, when we've had this discussion here for the last almost hour about your father and how powerful he was and, the decisions that he made for this, that, or the other. But those are kind of things that gets overshadowed as the women, if they're married, that have to deal with all of that and a man that has all those responsibilities. And I get stressed out sometimes by, comparing it to what he was going through, very minuscule stuff, and it stresses my wife out. So I can't imagine,
Or
what she had to deal with. Those are things that I think gets overshadowed a lot.
absolutely. And I knew that. So I constantly was trying to make up for what he didn't give her, the lack, and she relied on me for that. And she totally, she wanted to make amends to me as well. And the fact that she put too much on me, and I was young and um, because I was an empath, I was taking on everything. So it was very, very hard for my body to process. Um, and, I would go through bouts of severe depression and anxiety, and I'd be down to 90 pounds, wouldn't eat for 3 weeks because of it. And then all of a sudden, one day, spirit, it was like I got pulled off the couch, and each time it was usually either McDonald's, which I don't ever eat, I don't ever touch now, but it was either McDonald's or Chinese food. I don't even know what, it was definitely spirits. I got in the car with me. I drove myself to McDonald's. I got 2 large fries and a vanilla shake, and I would dip the fries in the shake, and then it would open up my appetite, and I would be okay after that. But I would go through those bouts. We call them in my line of work, we call them dark nights of the soul. It's like having to release, and unburden yourself of all the energy and emotions that you take on. It was a long haul. But I tell you, I would not change not even a second of it because who I am today is because of what I experienced. And that's why I tell everybody, you can't blame your parents for everything forever. At some point, you have to pick yourself up and you have to say, okay, I'm going to take the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I'm going to shift it into something that, makes me a better person,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important because a lot of people, especially nowadays, these younger people, I get on my daughter all the time. I'm like, you your generation really just it pisses me off because it seems like they look for every thing or excuse in the world to just give up. And I'm just like, especially back in, your father's day, your day, my day, that just didn't happen. You had to get up and keep going. Yeah, you could get knocked down. Everybody gets knocked down, but you
Sure.
got to get back up. And nowadays it's just like people just stay down and then they expect the world to take care of them because they're down. I'm just like, at some point you got to look at it and say, tough shit. Everybody goes through stuff. You got to keep going. The world don't stop for you or me or anybody. It keeps on spinning. You have to keep on coming. The bills don't stop either.
That's it.
You think somebody don't care about you, stop paying a few bills. You'll find out there's a few people that care.
Right? Absolutely.
Now, your book, The Godfather's Daughter, where can everybody get a hold of that?
That is coming out. The book is being re-released in the second week of December. It should be.
Okay.
Second week. They can get it on Amazon. They can order it early if they want on my website,
Okay.
RitaGigante.com. They can go on the website. I'm sorry, RitaGigante.net is the website. RitaGigante dot com is the email. So they can pre-order it if they want. If they want a signed copy, they'll pre-order it. Once I get the copies in, I'll mail it out to them. So yeah, they can, and if they want to reach out to me, they can as well.
Okay, we'll put links to that in our show notes, and we'll probably go ahead and pick up a copy of that ourselves and put it back here. We like to put books of guests that we've had on the show, so we'll get us a copy of that, a signed copy, and stick it up there too, because that's something. Is it going to be on audio or just paperback, or what all platforms is it
It's
going to
going to
have?
be paperback, and I'm beginning the audio now, so they'll be able to get it on audio as well. The other piece is that I'm actually working on the second book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, that's cool. I can't. What? I mean, is it more like kind of about you, or still got
Yeah, my
elements of
father
your
says.
father?
Yeah, my father says you're not done. I still got things that, and my mother wants to be heard now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
I think the dynamic of, well, anybody I think involved in the mob period, but then when you add in the family aspect, I think that's one reason why The Sopranos was so popular, because
yes,
you had this guy that ran this crime family, and you had all sorts of characters throughout that show. But then you seen the guy that, had to go home and deal with his son and deal with his daughter and his mother, get that. Even though you might be the head of a major crime family, everybody still has problems. Those problems don't go away. And I think that's why that struck such a chord with people, and it's one of my favorite shows ever. Did you watch Sopranos?
I watched a few episodes, but I'm not um, I don't watch I watch like movies and stuff, not so much a lot of series. I'm a comedy person, so
Okay.
I watch a lot of comedy stuff because I deal with a lot of people who have serious stuff, and I have to be very careful as an empath. At night, I just want to watch comedy,
Yeah,
I just
that's my wife. She wants to watch something light and funny. That's what she says. She's like, I need light and funny. And for the podcast, it is crime and entertainment. So sometimes I get entertainment and, comedians. I've had some comedians on the show, but a lot of times it's not so funny. It's serious situations. It's,
sure.
it's drug smugglers. It's people that's been in, the life. It's all across the board. Sometimes it's, serial killer cases or murder cases. So I have to watch a lot of stuff that's not her favorite to watch before bedtime.
Of course, I get that. Yeah.
We clash at that, and there is a character in Sopranos that for a period of time I think probably was influenced by your father to a certain extent. It was Uncle Junior, and there was a period when he started walking around in his bathrobe in there, and you never really, I think he actually was kind of losing it at that point. But I told my wife, I said, they're kind of playing off of, Vinny the Chin with that, because that's exactly what he did, would walk around in the bathrobe. And you never really found out for sure if he was really doing it, because he would kind of come in and out. But then at the very end of the series, it was one of the best scenes, I think, of the whole series, is Uncle Junior's like in this old folks home. And Tony comes in, he's telling him that, Bobby had died, which was a main player in the show. And he's still acting like he don't know him, but then he kind of grabs him and gets in his face and And then Uncle Junior kind of looks at him. He's like, "What the fuck you want, a boutonniere?" And it was just
Oh,
like
boy.
for a minute, he kind of snapped back into who he used to be. But they
Yeah.
had this real touching scene, and he told him, he's like, you and my father ran North Jersey, and he was like, I was a part of that. He's like, well, that's nice. And I mean, it was such a great show, and I think that's why all these years later, people still resonate with it, and
Sure.
it's voted one of the best television shows of all time.
Yeah, it's like The Godfather,
Absolutely.
it's every year the same time it comes out and everybody watches. It's usually Christmas time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody watches it and it's like every year I like to watch, The Wizard of Oz, It's a Wonderful Life, things like that. Well, you grew up with them, you want to watch them every year because it reminds you of a good time,
Yeah. It
in your
takes you
life.
back to that place when, when you
Exactly.
remember, and it was as a safe place. So
Sure.
I'll close out with this one question. There's been so many movies about so many different people, especially involved in the life.
Yeah.
Some not so good, some very good. If there was a movie about your father, what would you want it to entail? Would you want it to entail, who he was as a family man? Would it strictly to be, how he was with his crime family? And who do you think right now would be the best to play him?
So I would think it would need to be all of the above because people need to see both sides of it. And they need to see how it affects the family because everybody glorifies and it's glamorous and it's this and it's that. And they don't realize how it affects the family. So I think you need to incorporate both sides of it for people to see. My person would be probably Bobby Cannavale.
I think he would be at you. You took the words right out of my mouth, and
Yeah.
he's a fantastic actor. And I think he could probably knock that out of the park. Is there any plans to do a movie about your father?
Working on it, with my book. I'm trying to get it out there. It's just in, the kind of talking stages. There's nothing yet, but I'm ready. And I know I've spoken to my dad about it and I know what I would want to do. And even if I had to choose a younger Vinny, because I would have to, he'd have to, Bobby couldn't play him young, but his son could. Bobby's son could play him young.
Mhm.
So, Chaz would have been my first pick a while back. I
Right.
don't know if that would be a fit right now.
Yeah.
But it might be, it's not something I would say no to completely. But Bobby to me he's fantastic. I think he
Yeah.
would do a fabulous job.
I've loved him ever since I've seen him in Boardwalk Empire. Like
Yeah,
I'd seen him in other things before. He was in Sex and the City. He had a stint in Oz, which was on HBO. So
yeah,
he's been around. He's a veteran actor, but that role he done in Boardwalk Empire, he just took it to another level. And I think he would be a fantastic choice to play your
yeah.
father. And I'm not downgrading anybody that's able to get a movie made in this day and time in this market, but there's a lot of crap out there. And I
Oh my
think a
God.
movie about, someone who is important as your father was, is something that really needs to be made for people to see, because a lot of times people don't know the whole story. And that's why we're glad that you was able to come on the podcast and do exactly what you explained, is say, yeah, people know him for this, but this is how it affected me as the daughter, his
Right.
wife as, my mother. There's a lot of other stuff that people don't see. There's a
No.
dark side to this. And, I want to say, I tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, pleasure was mine, hon. Anytime, really. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Well, I will put links to everyone to go and check out your book, also to your website. If they wanted to get in touch with you for a reading, or, to possibly communicate with a loved one, is there ways to do that as well?
Yeah, just on the website they'll have my email on there, everything, the phone number. Absolutely.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all have enjoyed this episode. I know I have for sure. I am Hollywood Wade. This was Rita Gigante. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Rita, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure, hon. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye now.